these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office, experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all, in-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
We hold these truths.
with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Welcome back, everybody. We have a return guest on with us, Arthur Brooks. Really interesting guy, former president of AEI, now a professor at Harvard, and teaching mostly how to be happy, which I think that's pretty important. As we're having this conversation, I'm taking a break from the chaos that we are discussing amongst ourselves in the Republican conference on who to elect as a speaker. And boy, there's a lot of unhappy people.
Don't say.
Yeah.
How's your happiness level hanging in there, Dan?
Well, we need to define happiness, and I think it's kind of like what you talk about in this book. Like, how do you define happiness? Is it your mood on a minute by minute an assessment? Is it a deeper sense of purpose and gratitude? I'm pretty happy right now. We got a 5-week-old daughter, which we've been waiting for her for a very, very, very long time. So it's hard not to be happy about her.
That's a good thing. It means you got your ideas in order. This book about how to get happier. I mean, you're not going to be happy, because happiness is not even just a destination. You need unhappy emotions and unhappy experiences to lead a full life, but you can get happier, and that actually starts with having your priorities in order. Your love priorities, your faith, your family, your friendship, work that serves other people, and really the rest is kind of a distraction, quite frankly.
It is. So you have 11 principles that you talk about for building the life you want. How should we talk? Should we go through? You kind of just mentioned one, right? Happiness is a direction, not a destination.
Yeah, it's sort of one of the mistakes. I mean, there's a bunch of mistakes. One of the biggest things that holds people back from getting happier is they don't know what it is, and they define it wrong. So a lot of people make the mistake of thinking their happiness is a feeling. Feelings. I mean, look, America is very feelings focused at this point. You're dealing with a lot of feelings out on the floor, but with your constituents, and they feel strong things and call your office, and everybody's telling you that you should get in touch with your feelings, and these feelings have a lot of validity to them. But the truth of the matter is that feelings are, proceed from a part of the brain that's simply sending you information. And if you overweight it into thinking that this is what really matters, and this is the central part of what your happiness is, man, you're going to get it wrong, and you're going to be really unhappy. Happiness is not a feeling. Feelings are evidence of happiness. Like the smell of your turkey is evidence of your Thanksgiving dinner. Happiness is actually something that's scientifically understood and defined, and that you can actually have a strategy for to get better at. It has to do with your enjoyment of life, your satisfaction in your accomplishments, and the meaning that you find in your life. And in this book, Oprah and I are, defining those things and putting a strategy together around it, on how each of us can get more skilled, better at pursuing each one of these macronutrients of happiness. So that's probably where we should start, right?
Yeah. So, happiness is a deeper sense. I mean, what's tough for people, and it's certainly tough in politics, is overcoming like that kind of default to a negative emotion, like a glass half empty kind of sensation. I mean, and I certainly find that I'm like, I should be happier about whatever just happened, the nice thing somebody said. But in politics, thousands of people say nice things, but it's that one negative comment that like really eats away at you.
There's a reason.
How do you advise people?
Well, to begin with is understand why that happens. You're not a negative person for focusing on the one versus the thousand. On the contrary, your brain is evolved to give you a negativity bias. When your ancestors were living in the Pleistocene, they developed more brain tissue to deal with negative emotions and positive emotions, because negative emotions keep you alive. Positive emotions don't. Positive emotions are nice to have. Negative emotions are critical. So if you're at a party and somebody smiles sweetly at you from across the room, that's kind of nice. But if somebody's frowning at you with an angry face, pay attention, man, because That person meets you outside and can be your undoing if you weren't paying attention to it. So
Yeah.
we're always on the alert for threats. We're always highly attuned to loss and sadness. Disgust actually has a whole area of the brain called the insular cortex, dedicated to nothing more than feeling disgusted, which is a way to alert us to pathogens so we don't get poisoned. Also, by the way, that part of the brain is what we use when a demagogic politician tells us that the other side is stupid and evil and disgusting. That's the same part of the brain that kicks in. So when Hitler compared people to rats and cockroaches, he was manipulating the limbic system of the brain so that we would get the disgust reflex. And that's when really bad politicians and news network people are telling us to be disgusted by people who disagree with us politically. They're trying to manipulate our brains so that we'll treat them the same way that we do something in the bottom of our shoe.
You like one of the fourth principles is, this is related to what we're just talking about. You say you can choose your reactions, and you can substitute the emotion you want for the one you feel. Right. That's easier said than done.
It is.
How do you train yourself to do that?
Yeah, I know. It requires some technique. So it requires an understanding of how emotions work. Emotions are not good or bad. They're positive and negative because they're either aversive, so that you'll stay away from something or avoid something, or they're approach oriented, so you'll go towards something. So there's only two positive basic emotions: joy and interest. And they're evolved so that we'll get a pleasure payoff when we see somebody that we love or get something we want, or that we want to learn things to get better at what we do. Those things give us pleasure. The four negative emotions are fear, anger, disgust, and sadness. And all of those are evolved too, so that you'll avoid things that can actually threaten your survival or make it harder for you to pass on your genes. And all that is information. People think they have good and bad emotions. There's no such thing as a good emotion, and there's no such thing as a bad emotion. All they are is information. And when we understand that, then we stop being afraid of our bad feelings. It's weird, my students, I had students that were talented like you. I mean, you're a graduate student from university where I teach now. And the one thing all my graduate students have in common is they're really afraid of failing. I mean, they're at Harvard. And so they're really afraid of failing because they haven't failed, but they're actually not afraid of failing. They're afraid of how they'll feel if they fail. They're really afraid of their aversive emotions, which is craziness when you think about it. So we must get to the point where we understand that emotions are nothing more than information to signal what's going on out to us. And then if we can use a technique called metacognition, where we put space between what we feel and what we do, we have a prayer's chance of actually using the executive centers of our brain, called the prefrontal cortex, to decide how we're going to react no matter how we feel. And there's lots of ways to do that. I mean, your grandma probably told you to count to 10 when you were angry. And you're pretty good at that on the floor, I have to say. I've admired you through the years that you tend to hold your temper pretty well. I mean, you've been in combat. So you've seen problems. So you've seen actual problems. But the truth of the matter is that the way to do this is you should count. When you're really angry, you should count to 30, because it takes 30 seconds to deliver the information to your prefrontal cortex. And while you're doing that, imagine the implications of what you want to say. So you want to, somebody insults you and you want to say, well, screw you. Count to 30. And while you're doing that, imagine what would happen, with people watching you and feeling disappointed or eliciting a worse reaction or whatever it is. And by the time you get to 30, your prefrontal cortex, your CEO brain, is in charge, and you choose a reaction that's better than the one that was being dealt to you by your initial emotion. That's how you get this stuff done.
Tough when somebody's in your face, but definitely applicable to a text, right? A lot of people angry text, I myself included, and I'm always like, probably didn't need to super angry text that just then. There probably wasn't a whole ton of benefit. And
always wait. The other thing is that when you're, one of the things that's really useful to a lot of people today, a lot of young people today suffer from a lot of anxiety. And generalized anxiety disorder. They go to the campus counseling center and say, you have anxiety, as if it were a switch instead of a dial. It's crazy. It's overdiagnosed on everything. But all anxiety is unfocused fear, because they're getting stimulated by so many different things, and their fear centers are on high alert and sending them all kinds of unfocused signals. And so the way to fix that problem is to focus it. And that's a metacognition tool as well. So what you do is when you're feeling a lot of anxiety, take out a piece of paper and write down the 5 things that are freaking you out right now. And in writing the words, you deliver the emotion to your prefrontal cortex out of your limbic system, and it's no longer ghosts. All the ghosts are gone. All it is the real thing. And you're like, actually, that's not that scary. Actually, that's not that bad. Or if it is, at least I can actually deal with it because I've defined it at this particular point. So I always do this so that my CEO brain is in charge. And, I'm the driver, not the little kids in the back seat, which is all my emotions.
This is an interesting tangent I want to talk about is the certainly market increase in anxiety levels amongst young people.
Right.
How much of that is real? And how much of that is just us, like you said, falsely or overly diagnosing what is actually just normal life as an anxiety disorder?
Yeah. There's a combination of both, almost certainly. There's been an explosion of diagnosis of mental illness for sure. And young people in the 20s today are being diagnosed at massive rates on clinical depression and generalized anxiety. These are the 2 things. Now, the problem with that is, once again, those things are dials, not switches. Every single person listening to us right now has anxiety and depression. The question is how much and whether it's a problem. And that's part of being alive. One of the things I say to my students, they're MBA students at the Harvard Business School. I say, look, you're at Harvard. If you don't feel anxiety and depression, then you need therapy, man. This is a stressful experience to begin with. Okay. So that's part of it, is the overdiagnosis, as if we have a thing or don't have a thing. But there's also, it's worth pointing out that life has actually become a lot more stressful for ridiculous reasons. There's basically been a kind of a climate and a weather problem when it comes to happiness for young adults in particular. I don't mean that literally. I'm not talking about the climate, but the climate is the general.
But literally, the climate, that people point to the climate change issue as like a reason for the anxiety. So it is a little bit literal.
Well, they're hanging their anxiety on a thing, and that's actually one of the weather problems. The climate is that the institutions of faith in people's lives are declining. Family life is degrading. People have fewer close friends, and they find people have a less of a healthy attitude toward work, which is serving other people and earning your success. So that's the climate, and that's been going on since the early 1990s. That's been a gradual degradation in happiness, because those are the 4 institutions of happiness: faith, family, friends, and work. But then there are these storms, the weather. 2008, people think it was the financial crisis. No, it was the broad uptake of social media. And social media made it so that people don't see each other as much. They're a lot lonelier, and they're getting generalized anxiety because of all the incoming information that's coming at them. It's really bad for the human brain. Horrible.
Yeah.
The second,
you're not emotionally capable of dealing with what is like effectively omniscience about the world's problems.
Yeah. And the second thing is around 2014, 2015, 2016 is when the polarization culture in American politics basically had baby boomers my age conscripting child soldiers into the culture war. And basically, it's like, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. You got to be as pissed off as you could possibly be. And everything is as DEFCON 5. And, it's like all the fire engines need to go to every single thing, and everybody wants to kill you, and everybody wants to erase your identity. And it was this uptake of identity politics, which was largely manufactured by politicians and media in their 50s and 60s that wanted ground troops of young adults. That was the second storm. And the third storm, of course, was COVID, where, everybody had to go home and stay home forever and ever and ever. Amen. And they got unbelievably lonely. You found that everything from metabolic disorder to depressive symptoms like quadrupled under that period. And we haven't come back from it. Those are the 3 storms that have permanently given us a downtick in happiness, especially young adults.
Well, it's kind of a depressing analysis. Because it's hard to fix any of that. You're not putting social media back in the box. You're not putting the 24-hour news cycle of craziness back in the box. This is a particularly crazy time if you're paying attention. But I often remind people who do, because I deal with people all the time, and there's some who are just freaked out. I'm losing my country. I'm losing everything. I'm like, whoa, get off the internet for 30 days and just like live your life. And I promise you'll stop feeling that way. Because
there are solutions. There actually are solutions to this thing, but they require leadership for people my age and your age. In leadership, positions of leadership, I'm a professor, and I'm I'm an author, and you're a politician, and you're a public broadcaster, and we need to start telling people the truth. Is the bottom line. Number one is social media is dangerous. Social media is like a drug, and it's a really dangerous drug at that. Number two is stop hating your political enemies. That's stupid. We need political leaders that actually can love each other and do something and, collaborate even with people that they disagree with. And that everything where you don't get 100% doesn't mean you're getting 0%, for Pete's sake. That's just a crazy way of doing business. I know you agree with me because I know your views, and I agree on, I guess, everything. And the last but not least is that you need people. You need people. It's not okay. I mean, Zoom screens and social media are not a substitute for life. And then last but not least, to fight the climate change, faith, family, friends, and earn your success and serve other people in your work. That's it, man. Get your spiritual life together, call your mom, make real friends, and hang out with your real friends, and make sure that you see in your work a way to serve your sisters and brothers and lift other people up. That's what it comes down to.
And that's important. We have a lot of overlap in my book too. And one thing I wrote about come to mind as you're saying these things was the issue of perspective about like what's hard and what isn't. It's you can apply this to literally anyone, no matter what they're going through, I think, because I can tell you or anyone with and I can be 100% confident in this statement that whatever you're going through, you might have been through something harder already, so you're going to get through this. And if you haven't been through something harder than this, I can guarantee you that there's about a bazillion people throughout the span of human history who have been through way harder things than you are dealing with right now, and they dealt with it a lot better than you're dealing with it now. Like, so it's a little bit of a tough talk, but it's a fundamental truth. It just based on probability alone, it's a fundamental truth. It doesn't take away from you might be going through something truly difficult. I have very little sympathy for somebody at Harvard going through a difficult course at HBS, of course, but like they need to be told too, have some perspective, bro. 100 years ago, their biggest problem from that day was finding fresh water. Like that's a real problem.
I know. But I mean, again, the negativity bias alerts you to the problems, and we're just human. And so no matter who you are, you're always being alerted to people sitting in first class getting kind of bummed out because the food isn't very good. And, that's just like
the Wi-Fi's in and out. It's like, what the hell?
I know. What is it? It's like, you guys, you got crummy service and the whole thing. And we get irritated because we focus on the thing that we're not.
I'm guilty of it.
And you have to keep things in perspective.
Yeah,
of course. All of us are. I mean, that's how the human brain is wired.
No, it's true. And I mean, like these divisions right now, they are the political divisions, I mean, and the internal divisions we're dealing with at the moment in the Republican Party that have been present for some years. They are a product of an incentive to tell half truths and an incentive to focus on the negative, because if somebody's doing okay as an office holder, well, how the hell are you going to run against them? And so you have to campaign against somebody, and so you have to focus on the negative, and that has compiled and compounded over time in a way that is unique to this century because of social media and the internet. I think it felt a bit more sustainable in our past life, prior to the rise of the internet and the kind of the constant information flow, and it's extremely unhealthy at the moment. And we're in a place where like it is just common parlance in politics to say, well, everything's a disaster, people are suffering, but only when the other guy's in office. As soon as your guy's in office, it's like people are looking great again. And I'm like, we have metrics to deal with whether people are quote unquote suffering or not. We have economic metrics. Like we can be objective about this, and yet we're not. And you're, as a leader, you have a responsibility not to rile people up unnecessarily. But if you try to partake in that kind of nuance, like you're no longer part of the team, right? You're a rhino, you're not conservative. It's like, whoa. My level of anger is not an indicator of how conservative I am. And if that's what you think, then you're voting wrong. I mean, you're like asking for the wrong things from your leaders, and that combination of leaders willing to lie and at best tell half truths, and voters' willingness to eat it up it's the biggest problem in our politics, and it exists on both sides, of course.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
It
but it's not even
manifests differently.
voters. It's not even the voters. What it is the most activated activist voters that are most likely to vote in primaries, which is something like 7% of the voting population.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting poll from More in Common, which is a group run by a guy named Tim Dixon in UK and the United States that asks people, what do you think about the current political climate? 93% of Americans today say they hate how divided we've become as a country. That's great news. The bad news is that 7% don't hate how divided we become as a country, because they're getting their entertainment and their jollies and their votes and their money and their followers from it. And everybody listening to us has got to remember that when you hate, somebody's profiting, and it's not you. It's getting taken out of your soul, man. And somebody's getting votes, or they're getting your attention or your eyeballs, or just getting your jollies from getting you all riled up on Twitter or X, or whatever we're calling that machine right now. And that's a really, really bad thing. Now, the problem is we have a system in which that 7%, dominated, by the way, by dark triad personalities, which is a combination of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. No joke, that happens in 7% of the population. They're disproportionately on the internet, disproportionately in show business, disproportionately in politics, and they're the loudest, most fringe voices on both the right and the left. So we have to take responsibility where it's due, no matter what side. You and I have our own sympathies, but our side's got, they got it too.
Yeah. Well, I care about my side more. I care about the problems on my side.
Yeah,
more
I need dark triads.
To be healthy. Yeah.
Totally. So, and those are the people who are most fired up and get the most apparent entertainment from the hatred industrial complex, who are most likely to show up in primaries. And so the result is they're going to reward pathological dark triad personalities. And now we've got a war of dark triad versus dark triad, malignant narcissists versus malignant narcissists. And the rest of you guys are caught in the middle going, what the heck is going on?
They're a bit nihilistic too.
For my people.
Might add nihilistic to that list as well, because it really is on both sides like a burn it all down kind of mentality that political spectrum really meets here. As far as the personalities go, I say this all the time, like they are the same people. Those fringe elements on the left and the right, they are the exact same people. One of them just wears a blue jersey, one wears a red jersey, and they actually overlap somewhat in policy preferences as well. But on a personality scale, whether they're disagreeable or is psychopathic in some cases, like they're very, very similar. I mean, it's like I'm talking to the same person. Like they don't do linear logic. Like they cannot get through a logical deduction. It's frustrating. And it's like at a certain point, you're like, okay, well, what do you do about it? And I tell people all the time, you go out and vote in primaries. Let's bring it back to the primary election. There are so many people who complain about what their choices are. And I'm like, did you vote in the primary? No, just shut up. You got to get out and vote in the primary. That's going to be a big push for the next year for me.
It's all for sure. It's also just it's an unhappiness provoking such situation for many, many, many millions and millions of Americans. And it's one of the things that people often ask me is, okay, it's these dark triads. Oh, by the way, 7% of the population, that's 1 in 14 people. It's not just politics. It's also a bunch of people in your office and probably a couple of people that you dated. And and how do you know? Because they're self-centered, they tend to be dishonest, they tend to be disloyal, they freak out and attack you with the slightest amount of disagreement. They always act like victims. They're always the victim. This is a classic dark triad thing. I'm the victim, even though you can be perpetrating any crime, but I'm the victim over and over and over again. And that sounds an awful lot like what the most radical voices in Congress sound like these days.
100%.
They have this virtuous victim. Or the sort of the woke complex on campuses, or the kind of cultish right wing stuff that we see. All of it has these characteristics of we're victims, they're evil, they want to hurt us, so we will stop at nothing to beat them, including lying, right? Mm-hmm. Including actually violating our basic norms and looking the other way when our leaders are unbelievably unvirtuous, that don't live up to our own moral standards. Well, that's my guy. So it's just crazy. I mean, the way that we actually see this. But the whole point is that this is one of the reasons, again, that's the second storm of that political radicalization that's dramatically lowering American happiness.
Yeah. And there's a couple other problems which is I call it the political entertainment industry. And it's created an incentive structure to really perpetuate all of these problems that we're talking about. And I tell people all the time, like, you're being lied to. It's, there is, first of all, there's no establishment. Stop talking to me about the establishment. By definition, there's no establishment if 4% of our conference can depose our speaker. By definition, there's no establishment. There's no establishment if you actually gain notoriety and support by, quote unquote, bucking the establishment. That very fact negates the existence of an establishment. Now, if there were an establishment, I would probably describe it as the political entertainment industry, which I would describe as, certain news hosts, Twitter influencers, Instagram influencers, right? Like this sort of cabal of media, right-wing media people. Again, I'm just focused on the right because I don't care about the left. I just want to beat them, and I want us to be healthy and actually beat them. And not because they're bad people. I'm going to speak Arthur Brooks language right now, but because I disagree with their policies.
It's a competition of ideas, which is fundamental to a free society.
It's supposed to be what politics is. We're supposed to want to beat them, not kill them. Like, that's the whole point of politics.
So by the way, that's the point of baseball too.
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with competition.
Right.
It's like the Yankees want to beat the Red Sox. They don't want to kill the Red Sox because, real
some Yankees fans want to kill the Red Sox.
I know, those are the fans.
But I tell people all the time, like, politics is, if I was to define it, it is the act of disagreeing with each other without killing each other, right? It's supposed, they're like, why can't you guys just like do what makes sense and get along? I'm like, we're not supposed to get along. Like, that's not what you should be asking for. There should be this kind of this healthy debate of ideas. But the problem is that debate the intellectual level of that debate has been lowered dramatically because of the political entertainment industry. And because of the consultant industry as well. So consultants are getting together on both sides, and they're like, "How do I get my guy to win?" And so they've detached themselves from basic principles that maybe, if I'm being really generous, got them to that job in the first place of being a political consultant. Maybe they really believed in something, but then they started taking polls, and then they started running numbers and looking at Twitter and seeing like where certain things are going. See, like you said, who are the most active people, who's paying attention? How do we get them? Okay, well, to get them, you need to say this because this is what they're responding to. And so politicians just parrot that. And what you end up with is a detachment from some basic principles. And it seems to me a recent phenomenon. And that's a scary freaking thing. And, the only thing I can do is explain it to people. And once I explain it to people, they do get it. People get it. They're like, it does feel like that, doesn't it?
It does an awful lot. And, when people are actually more about, and again, when you turn the keys over of a great democracy over to dark triad, very, very broken personalities, that's basically what you get. But the good news is it's not the first time it's happened. And we've recovered from it, and good things have come. And the way that they've done that is that all the good guys didn't get chased out. And in the end, in America, we usually wind up figuring out by hook or by crook some way to get it right. Sometimes it takes a long time. But remember, from 1896 until, 1896, 2000, 1896, 1904, and 1908, William Jennings Bryan was the candidate for the Democratic Party for president of the United States. He lost all three times. Ultra populist, a malevolent, pretty racist guy. He was bringing just the worst out of everybody, following the most radical voices in the party. And he led that party in a terrible way for a long, long time. Really good for the Republicans, actually, because it was hard for him to win, but it was really bad for American democracy. And then in the end of the day, he finally went away. He actually got absorbed into the Woodrow Wilson administration. Is how they neutralized him, is by giving him power. But the whole point is, that's not a super long time over the sweep of history. And good people continued to believe in America. Good people were trying to be part of a solution to the problem. And so the people were listening to us and guys like you. Look, it's not like, I'm not going to psychoanalyze you, Dan, but it's not, I left DC and life began anew, dude. I mean, I was running AEI for almost 11 years. And I'm like, when I leave DC, what's going to be? I left and it's just sweet. It's like I talk to my neighbors. They're not talking about politics. They're talking about choir practices and soccer games. And they're talking about the Red Sox and the Patriots. And that's the stuff they're doing up here. And and most of America is not suffering in this particular way. But it's worth pointing out, like, there was a time when you didn't walk off the battlefield. And we're a military family too. I mean, I got a scout sniper in the Corps, and he's doing his duty. And right now, quite frankly, we need you an awful lot. We need you to, cross swords with people on your own side and say, stop screwing up this country and saying the truth and not giving up and holding out hope, because that's how America gets saved, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be fair, those good people you're talking about, those are mostly the only people I meet, like physically meet in person, and interact with in person. The crazies are online. And, I as somebody who likes to poke the hornet's nest, I'll deal with,
not that afraid of things.
Yeah. Like, I'll deal with backlash multiple times throughout the last few years. And, the worst is always when you deal with your own side. And, I tell people all the time, because there's a lot of people dealing with it right now. There's some serious gross attacks from the political entertainment industry against like 22 people who won't vote for Jordan. And they all have different reasons for why they won't vote for Jordan. But, there's a serious attack on them. And I'm like, well, they know the truth. Twitter isn't real life. It still sucks, to be hit like that online, but it's just not real life. Now,
it is not.
It can be. There could be that crazy, like, who sees it and does something.
Can be, and just ask Steve Scalise that when people are radicalized on the internet, what winds up happening. A guy shows up with a rifle to your baseball game, but it's worth pointing out that Twitter in particular, it's smoke. It's this weird. It's almost like a science fiction story where when you're looking at something, it's real, and when you look away, it disappears and it doesn't exist at all. That's mostly what social media is. And it's designed so a few people can scare you. The setup of the design of the platform is that 6 people can look like 6 million and freak you out. It's supposed to stimulate a part of your brain dedicated to fear. That Twitter is supposed to turn on your amygdala, a part of your limbic system that says fight or flight. And, the point is that if you hear a twig snap behind you on the Pleistocene, you take off running. You don't ask if it's a friend or a foe, because your amygdala says it might be bad. But that's what Twitter is doing. It's stimulating your amygdala in the same way. When you understand that, when people learn to understand that, when they can learn to manage themselves better, which they will in the coming decades, but which we are responsible for doing right now, Dan and Arthur are responsible for trying to do right now, and disciplining ourselves to say, that ain't real, man. That really is. I mean, that's really just smoke. Somebody said, I'm taking you down. You're like, oh, my voters are against me. No. 6 bots are against you. Is what that really is.
People need to know too, there's a lot of bots out there. The more I kind of dive into this world, I'm like, there's a lot of that political entertainment industry uses bots to sort of, because what these influencers will do, they're all bought off, right? You can buy influencers. I mean, the real people, don't get me wrong, that they have accounts. They've spent time like making political memes, building those accounts. They are for sale. These people are absolutely for sale. And sometimes they'll sell like a service, which is, to boost your engagement. And it is more likely, a part of that is other influencers, and it's all a little like bubble. And so you seem like you're getting more engagement, but a lot of those engagements are just bots, and they're certainly not your voters. And that's kind of harmless, I guess, if you just describe it that way. But where it's become harmful is the messaging that occurs within that bubble. And it's a messaging, and it's a set of talking points that only a very small portion believe. But so here's, you said the 7%, right? Okay, so let's say it's at 7. That's probably a statistical fact, maybe, like so as personality spectrums go. So, but the thing is that the problem we have in politics is that 7%, there's another 20% that isn't that 7%, but is very much influenced by that 7%. Okay. That's the reality I see. And that makes that makes our lives difficult. So these are not crazy bad people, but they follow these accounts because they've trusted them. They follow that 7%, that really loud 7%, and they look to them for guidance. For some reason, they trust them, right? And so that's what I'm trying to break people of too. Like, why? Ask yourself why you're trusting this random account that's just commenting, because I'll see it in comments sometimes, and it's almost hilarious. I'm like, in a comment section, somebody's like, well, he's a globalist rhino. He's with George Soros. And this next will be like, oh my God, I loved Dan. Like, I can't believe he's a he's with Soros. And I'm like, it took that little to convince you? Like, what the hell? You know, now you can convince them back. Like you could correct it. But, you know, I just think you gotta encourage people. Like, you just gotta, can't believe, I don't know why you do believe some of the things we see. We've and part of that's the media, maybe the mainstream media has lost a lot of trust, and deservedly so. It's a tough situation.
I mean, people believe any left-wing thing that they see too. I mean, they'll turn on MSNBC and somebody's trying to get ratings by pumping up a conspiracy theory. You know, the whole thing about Trump and Russia and the whole deal, and is mostly just smoke, man. I mean, it was just wrong, but it was being promoted on cable news networks every single night by actual hosts that are not contrite. And so it's not just social media. There's that whole complex. But the big majority of people in your district, they don't even know about that, which is the really interesting thing. You know that about 22% of the population regularly uses Twitter. 80% of the political activity on Twitter is coming from about 2% of the users. And so the result of that is that most people they don't have the slightest idea about it, but it can dominate us. It's supposed to freak you out. That's really what it is, because they know that they can get inside Dan Crenshaw's head, and there's no other way to do that.
Yeah, I don't look at Twitter much anymore. I mean, accounts I follow on Instagram now are just for my own entertainment. It's like home. It's like
raccoons, you know, eating stuff, and you know,
like home decor. Like it's like that kind of stuff, because it just fine. I'll be addicted to it, but it's like, it's not driving me crazy, you know. And in fact, I see a lot of interesting woodworking ideas. There's harmless stuff, and you know, you gotta do what you gotta do. What do you think? You know, you're a scholar and a thinker, and what do you think about our current set of options? And I'll bring you up to speed on what our set of options are and what we're literally debating right now. We'll post this podcast at some point within the next week or so. So just so listeners understand, today is, the heck is today?
Today is the 19th of October.
Yeah, October 19th. So we're still in the midst of debating what the heck we do. Jim Jordan is in support of, as I am in support of as well, simply empowering Patrick McHenry, who is the Speaker pro temp at the moment, which is a designated position by Speaker McCarthy. He has to write down that list of names in case he dies or something like that, or gets deposed, which is what happened. And so there's a real argument, since we can't actually agree on, and we have such a slim majority, so we all have to agree. We can't agree on who the speaker is, and so we need to empower the temporary speaker to bring bills to the floor. There's an argument over whether he already has that power or not. There's a very good argument to suggest he already does. There's actually no rule that says he doesn't, and that's an interesting constitutional argument. I mean, are we even meant to be in this limbo where you actually don't have a speaker? Some would argue no. It's actually not allowed, because you have to have continuity of government, and our House rules say that he has it doesn't actually limit his powers, which was, I think, a misconception people are operating under. That being said, people still want to have the vote in order to just make it a rule, and that's it. I'm in favor of this because we don't have a choice. Like we just don't have a choice. Nobody has 217, and I'm not really willing to keep going down this list of like, who's the 16th most popular person in our conference and hasn't made anybody mad and can get 217. I don't think that person actually exists. And the real work is people are like, we need to stay here till the job is done, and to take all night, all weekend, all vacation till we find a speaker. And I'm like, why do you think that's work? Because I think work is the legislating and the committee work, and then voting on it on the floor. I think that's actual work. So get off your. As I told people today, I was like, stop campaigning inside this closed room. Like, that's not deciding who's the most popular in this little room is not actual work, right? It's bullshit. The work is the committee stuff. It's what we're doing on the task force to battle cartels. Like, that's work. I don't know. Curious what your thoughts are. That's the background and kind of where we're at, but.
Yeah, no, it's a complicated situation because it's actually not clear in the rules whether or not you can actually try to get some stability with a speaker pro tem. But if you can, run with it. It's just an interesting thing about the study of leadership. Sometimes the most interesting, the greatest amount of progress comes when you don't have a permanent leader. that temporary leaders can often do the most stuff. So what you'll find, for example, and this is a classic thing in organizational behavior. So you get a CEO, and the CEO, is there for a super long time, and they don't know how they're going to get along with the CEO. But sooner or later, the CEO's got to retire or dies or something. Now, the next person almost always fails, right? The next person is why? Because they're looking for the old guy, et cetera, et cetera. So the next person, fails within a few years, and then they get an interim CEO while they're looking for a real CEO. That interim CEO almost always does the most good. Why? Because he doesn't care. He doesn't give a rip. Patrick McHenry's not trying to have a glorious 8-year reign as Speaker of the House. Patrick McHenry's he's a good dude, man. He's going to be like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I got no time. I'm going to do as much stuff as I possibly can. So my advice on that is I don't know the constitutional ins and outs and whether or not we need Chief Justice to sort that one out. Who knows?
We make our own rules.
That's great. Keep Patrick and say, look, we got a temporary guy because we can't get anybody yet. We'll keep kind of working on getting a new guy. But in the meantime, let Patrick run the business, and Patrick will just try to run the table on getting as much stuff done as possible because he's got nothing to lose. That turns out to be probably the best strategy.
I've made that point as well. And I want to expand upon it, because what I've noted is we've emotionally convinced ourselves that this is the most important position ever, right? Like it's everything. And I'm like, guys, just to be clear, the Speaker of the House still has one vote. It is not the president. We've imbued too much power in the president as well. But he is somebody, or she is somebody, who brings bills to the floor. And it's like, well, how are you going to decide how you brings big bills to the floor? Well, we could create these committees, and we could have jurisdictions within those committees, right? And then we would pass legislation out of those committees. And then the rules committee would be a whole other committee, and they would decide which bills go to the floor. It's like, at which point does the speaker insert themselves? Now, the way we've been doing it is they can squash it, but McHenry's probably not going to. McHenry's going to be like, I'm just going to let the process go, because we already have this process. We already have it. This is an administrator. And I'm like, I kind of made the joke today. I'm like, nobody looks more like an administrator than Patrick McHenry. And Google a picture of Patrick McHenry, folks. And he's a good guy. He knows the insides of this place pretty well. And he's not looking to be speaker. So there's a reason McCarthy put him in that position.
Yeah, he's an administrator, and that's probably what you need right now to keep the boiler room running on that institution, is the way that works. By the way, and in the meantime, maybe go outside the chamber. The Constitution permits the Speaker of the House is not a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. And I learned that the hard way, because when they were in the fight going for Paul Ryan back in the day, Senator Ben Sasse nominated me to be, and I was the president. Oh, yeah. I'm not even in politics, man.
If we do another vote where it's obviously going to go down, I'm seriously considering voting for my 5-week-old daughter, just so for the rest of her life she can tell people, I was voted Speaker of the House once. What have you done? I mean, I
got one vote.
It's tempting. I'm not gonna lie.
The only problem is she might win, Dan. Then what?
She's adorable. Yeah, she might win, but it gets to the point though. It's like, what is their role even? It's like, it's to bring things to the floor. The real work is not this popularity contest. And I kind of almost got mad today yelling at some members. I'm like, don't get up here and pontificate. Don't get up here like you're on a campaign trail talking to us in private. I hate that. We've got to accept reality around us and then operate within it. It's another problem in politics in general, is there are simply some people that you have to convince the sky is blue. And this was a debate over the debt ceiling and appropriations. It's like there's too many politicians who I think give their voters a very unrealistic sense of potential outcomes. And it drives people crazy and mad, because they have expectations here that were set by people who they trusted. But those people either convince themselves that it was possible and are crazy, or they're just lying, and being very unrealistic with people is harmful to their happiness. That's for sure. I do want to ask you, I think another interesting topic to hit on the happiness conversation is meaningful work. And what do you say to people? I wrote about this in my book too, is what do you say to people who actually do have shitty jobs? I mean, and like you can't, it's like, it's not their dream job. They hate it. Maybe they're just trying to get by. How do you talk to, that's a struggle. I mean, it's a struggle internally. It could be a struggle financially too. How do you bring them up?
Well, it turns out that the people who get the most joy from their jobs are not in their dream jobs. They're not. So, to get in your dream job is a very perilous thing. I've talked to people, all they want to be is a college professor. Let's say that they're Latter-day Saints, they're Mormons. And so all they wanted to be is a college professor at Brigham Young University. That turns out to be really bad when you finally get it. It actually turns out to be a really tough thing. And that these are not going to be the happiest faculty typically, because nothing lives up to high expectations. Your dream job is not going to be your dream job. Now there's shoveling out turkey coops, which might not be the best job either. Truly the happiest people in their jobs, they tend to be in between, but what they have in common is not the actual content of the job. Number one is that they feel that they have a good boss. This is number one. And a good boss means that they're able to earn their success. This is what's so beautiful about the capitalist system. But the capitalist system requires people in positions of authority that can execute on its promises, on its moral promises. That means that people are recognized for their hard work, merit, and personal responsibility, and they're rewarded for it. That's number one. That's earned success. Number two is that they feel like they're serving others. They actually feel like they're serving somebody else. And people who have service jobs where they use their hands, they tend to get that more than people who don't. And so, I talk to people all the time who have kind of like fancy office jobs and feel really empty inside. And one of the pieces of advice that I give as a happiness specialist, members of Congress, for example, that one of the happiness specialists, like me, one of the things that you'll recommend it to, you're a lawyer and you're doing a lot of clerical stuff and it's kind of boring and you don't feel like it's really, really helpful. One of the ways to inject a sense of service in your job is something really, really simple like this. At 2:00 in the afternoon, when everybody's kind of dozing off, etc., go to the break room and get a big fresh cup of coffee and bring it to the person in the next cubicle or the next office and say, "You look like you could use a fresh cup of coffee." Just that. I mean, just take my advice. Just do that, and it's gonna, and look at the look on the person's face when you just did that, and you're gonna get stuck as the guy who brings the fresh coffee and does nice things for no apparent reason. And suddenly you're going to start liking your job more. There are no shitty jobs. This is the important. And it's like one of the reasons that Mike Rowe is such a big star is because he has that dirty jobs thing. And we're stuck in this elitist, silo of opinion in this country that says that if you're not making a lot of money and you're not working indoors and you're not doing something that requires a bachelor's degree or higher, that you've got a crummy job. And that's simply not true. I got the data on what brings people joy. It's earning your success and serving other people. And, I'm telling you, it's funny. It's like when I was working with my kids, my kids are way older than you because I'm way older than you. And when my kids were growing up, I would say, imagine yourself actually being happy what you do. And, I'm a third generation college professor. My dad was, my grandfather was, what we all do. We all suffer through PhDs and we become college professors. But I got this son and he wasn't, we were lucky, he was not a highly motivated student. Let's put it that way. Right. And, and I said, what do you see yourself doing where you can really find yourself? You can answer the meaning. There's two questions about meaning, which is why are you alive and for what are you willing to die? And if you can't answer those questions, you're not going to be happy because you're not going to you're not going to have meaning. And here's the good news. If you can't answer those questions, everybody listening to us who can't answer those questions, go in search of those answers. That's all you have to do to find your sense of meaning. And my son, Carlos, my middle son, he was 19. Well, no, when he was in high school, it was just like, what am I going to do? And I have him put together his little business plan for his life. And he doesn't know what he's going to do. Okay. So after graduating from high school, I didn't bug him to go to college. Like I didn't go to college right after high school either. It took me 11 years to graduate from high school, 12 years to graduate from college, I should say. Carlos went away to Grangeville, Idaho and became a dryland wheat farmer for 2 seasons, picking rocks out of the soil, mending fences by himself, driving a combine 16 hours a day. And then he joined the Corps. and he did a really, because he was searching for the answers to his questions. Why am I alive? For what am I willing to die? And it's amazing, this meaning question. He went through basic at Paris Island, which is no walk in the park. And then it got harder because he did ITB, the Infantry Training Battalion at Lejeune. And then he did the NDOC for the Scout Sniper Platoon. So that was his MOS. He's got, he's an operator and he's at Camp Pendleton. This is a scary job for his dad, right? Because, can't always track his phone.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's like, I don't have to tell you, it's no joke. Right. And now the boy's got answers. He's 23 years old. He's married. And you ask him, why are you alive?
Those Marines, yeah, they'll get married quick.
Yeah.
It's good.
There's
Hey,
a
but
lot
you know
of pretty
what?
girls that want to marry him.
Yeah.
Plus he's 6'5", 204 pounds and 4% body fat. So
yeah, me
it turns
too.
out that he's got
me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's his answers are really indicative of actually what you can find when you go looking for it. If I ask, why are you alive? And he will say, I am, God made me to serve, and what are you willing to die for? And most people don't know until they've actually been asked that question in real life in their job. And he says, I'm willing to die for my family, for my faith, for my fellow Marines, and for the United States of America. Boom. These are good answers. And so this is really, what we're talking about. And a lot of what our modern culture has denied us the quest that we need to be able to find the answers to these questions. Everybody listening to us is like, I don't know, man. Go and search. Go and search. Ask yourself this, right?
And it depends on the person and what they're doing, and whether you might advise, like, quit what you're doing and find something else. Like, maybe that's actually a bad choice. I don't know. It depends. And it's like this. I remember I used you as my example, actually, in my book, because you wrote about it, one of your former books, about being a French horn player, and it's like it just wasn't working out. It just wasn't working. Like, at a certain point, that's only whether you're quitting. That's a you decision. Right. Like, I can't judge you. Look, there's you really can't, like, and even in buds, right? So even in SEAL training, when it's like a very black and white answer on whether you quit, you're like, I am ringing the bell, I am quitting. Now, you may never have been dedicated to the cause in the first place. So a lot of people tell themselves, what, I was never dedicated to the cause. That might be true. It might not be true. It might be an excuse. But the thing is only only you actually know. And so sometimes it's the right thing to do. Just actually, like, drop everything you're doing and change directions. Sometimes you just need to stop feeling sorry for yourself and actually maybe recognize that, first of all, if you have a job and somebody's paying you for that job, just, I guess, scientifically and economically speaking, it has value. And so therefore you have value, and you are doing some kind of service to somebody because they're willing to pay you for it. This is not a communist society. And therefore, if there's a job, it exists for a reason. So you should never feel useless. Just, it's easy to say that, but some people still do. But maybe it's helpful to remind people, like, and also, you can't get to your dream job without stepping a little bit. And I think my generation, maybe a little younger than me, like your younger millennials and Gen Z, like, there's a lot of complaining about affordability and what we have at a certain age, and some of that's pretty legitimate, considering even correcting for inflation and the cost of things and all that. Some of that's legitimate, but on the other hand, I also see people wanting things like a specific kind of house or apartment that their parents actually did not have. And I'm like, you say you can't afford a house, but you could also just drive 30 more minutes for a commute, and then you can. Right. So, this stuff is complicated.
It is complicated, and we set people up and their expectations. And I mean, the same thing is true in the college debate. We're gonna people who want free college for everybody, and okay, I got a practically free college for you. You go to the community college for 2 years, and then you transfer into the state university.
Yeah, there's already free college.
By the way, that's a pretty good education. It's every bit as good as the education that I got by correspondence. And which I did, by the way, soup to nuts for $10,000 in today's dollars, because I had like no money as a professional musician. Mm-hmm. And so the truth of the matter is that, we figure out a way to get this stuff done. And when we do, then we're just a lot happier because we're more self-sufficient as people. But when we define ourselves as victims of our circumstances and set ourselves up to say that everything is crummy, everything is worse than it used to be, then we're just making ourselves unhappy. And by the way, one of the reasons that we do that is because we have leaders that are telling us that that's the case, that we have leaders who say, oh, you're uniquely suffering. You're uniquely being, marginalized in some way, and things are actually worse. I mean, like look at the data. Everything's better. Everything's better. I mean, this generation has it worse than past generations. Are you kidding me? People my parents' generation, my grandparents, it's like, fortunately, my kids don't think that. They know that things were crummier for me than they are for them. But I hear young people today all the time saying, "Oh, is this the worst time to be in your 20s?" Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
It's not true. It's objectively not true. People are having a hard time, especially in the political world, distinguishing between, valid problems that need to be solved and then like the overamplification of those problems for the sake of like a political demagoguery.
Right.
And the problem is that that's convincing. People do get convinced, and I blame the left for like really opening the door to that victimhood. I mean, really telling people straight to their face, like, you are a victim, and you're actually a victim because of circumstances outside of your control. It's because of your skin color or your gender, and there's like this whole other group that we have to attack, and because they're the ones oppressing you. Like, this is just a wildly dangerous idea to begin with. The populist,
we've gotten so good at it on the right. I mean, we picked up that song. I mean, we're singing that song every.
It's the populist,
right? I mean, it's like totally. I mean, this whole idea that hey, there's a war on Christmas. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I mean, walk into the CVS, it's full of Christmas trees. That doesn't look like a war on Christmas to me. I mean, okay, somebody says something stupid on a college campus. Duh. I mean, it's people saying dumb things all day long, but we can become convinced that we're uniquely put upon, where we're in the safest, we're in the most prosperous, upwardly mobile society that has the greatest freedoms in the history of planet Earth. We should be down on our knees thanking the Lord every day for how good we've got it in the United States, and stop screwing it up so that we can continue passing on these freedoms and opportunities to the next generation of Americans who really, then they deserve it, is the whole thing. The only thing, the big threat to us is us screwing it up because we think it's so rotten, that we've convinced ourselves that our country is rotten, that we've lost our freedoms. And so we're willing to follow every crazy demagogue down the pike that's really going to compromise our democracy and create long-term problems.
And the idea that the country is rotten was, again, I blame the left for opening up that door, but the right has taken up that mantle. And I'm like, whoa, guys, like since when was our country totally as screwed up as you're saying it is? Not to say there's not problems, like there's objective problems. There's heightened crime in cities, and there's objective reasons for the policies that have created that increased crime. There's inflation. There are things that are absolutely real, but take a step back. Still better than before. Like, when I don't care what like moment before you're talking about, it's okay. There was a few years maybe recently that were objectively a little better, but but for the most part, like, grand scheme of things, it's much better now. And plus, I would say it's also way harder to screw up America than people think. There's been a lot of dumb, bad people trying to screw up America ever since our inception. And they came a lot closer, frankly, than we're coming now. It's just a remarkably stable system, and that's because of our Constitution. And the disorder in Congress, it sucks. It makes us look bad, but it is democracy. It is democracy, and there are factions, and those factions battle it out. And some of those factions are just dishonest demagogues for sure, but it's democracy.
But let's keep it in perspective, man. I mean, think about all. Yeah, we're so screwed up. You know how screwed up we are. All the immigrants in the world, they want to go to China now, right?
Yeah.
They're all competing to get to Cuba.
Let's all get to Cuba. These labor camps. They hear something about these labor camps. So like, is that free jobs?
They're fighting each other to get to Yemen. I mean, come on. I mean, it's just nutty. Everybody still wants to come to the United States. So let's just, at least have our eyes open about what a great place it is, and, share the love with each other a little bit, and maybe make it a little bit better. I mean, it's actually common sense.
All right. I don't know if you'll answer this question, but I might as well ask. You don't have to. But Harvard's in the news a lot lately with this, like the Israeli-Palestine issue, and all these students that signed this letter. There's
who's in the news? Oh, Harvard.
Harvard,
fair Harvard, my university. Yeah. My view on that is the same as for any university, which is that universities have had the unfortunate trend over the past 10 or 15 years of weighing in on every political, and social issue of making a statement. The truth of the matter is that almost every institution, even corporations, are being bullied by constituencies into saying something, even though they don't have a core competency in that. It's as if, Americans are sitting around the kitchen table going, I want to know what the CEO of Kentucky Fried Chicken has to say about the Middle East. I mean, it's crazy. A place like Harvard or any other university has a responsibility for serious inquiry, as opposed to making a statement about everything. This was morally easy. A barbaric terrorist attack that rained violence and started war on people who did not deserve it in any way, shape, or form. And we should stand with our Israeli brothers and sisters. That's obvious. That's so obvious. That's an obvious position for administrators to take. And an institution doesn't have to be on record, talking about the moral, issues, the tiny differences that are part of this thing. We should stick to our knitting, and we should actually set a policy. Harvard and Penn and Hillsdale and the state universities, they should have a policy of saying, when things happen around the world, don't expect us to weigh in. Expect us to have a serious competition of ideas where people disagree, and we protect freedom of expression, and we protect freedom of speech, and we make sure that nobody can shut down a debate that actually is not bordering on violence, and we're going to illuminate. We're going to bring more light than heat, and that means that I, as the president of this institution, am beholden to not actually weigh in and torque the debate from the very beginning. And that's what we should be doing. The problem is that the new president of Harvard was kind of boxed in, because we've been making these statements for years and years and years and years. So she felt like she had to, and I probably in her job would have felt like I had to too.
And I don't have it like in front of me what they said. I guess the criticism was kind of like a mealy mouthed, right? Like sort of
they thought it was too weak. A lot of people thought it was
very
too weak.
Gray area kind of, and it's in this, and whereas it seems obvious to objective observers that this isn't your normal Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This was a very black and white moral issue with
it was morally really easy. Yeah. But the thing is that's great about we have a new president who's really super dedicated to a competition of ideas and open debate and free speech. And that's what's really encouraging me. But the truth is, when your institution, and you're not responsible for it, like every other institution, is in a process of always weighing in on everything, and so you have to, and you don't get it quite right. I mean,
that's like that's a fair point. And they should have just shut up from the beginning of time, and I say that about CEO, especially about businesses. Universities are one thing, because you're like at a place of education. But I mean, and I guess the counter argument to what you just said is, well, but it's your students, so you got to say something about what your students are doing. That would be the counter argument. But CEOs, and I mean, God, I try to explain this. I'm like, you've never been punished by shutting up. Like, you've never been punished. There's a few idiots who threaten, but you will always be punished by idiotically weighing in on something. Unless you're super morally clear about it.
Yeah. I mean, Dan, the problem is that inside corporations, there's narrow constituencies of people that are trying to bully the CEO. And it's the same thing inside universities, where there's constituencies that are trying to bully the administration.
Right. That was my experience.
Yeah. And coming on record, and these administrators are trying really, really hard. And it's very Solomonic in the way that they're trying to make these pronouncements, because there's these competing constituencies and differing opinions inside the university. If they basically say, we're not going to be on record, making these pronouncements, what we're going to do is we're going to guarantee that everybody's welcome, everybody can talk, free speech, free expression, even when it's completely objectionable. And by the way, no student groups get to speak on behalf of this university. No student group. I don't care how many student groups sign a letter, they don't speak for us. Yeah. And they can't use us as a platform to be doing these things as well either.
One of the interesting things about this debate, and I saw it on the right actually, was like whether was the right thing to do to sort of quote unquote cancel these students. So some like employer groups had been like, we're not hiring these freaking people. Now, add my name to that list. I'm glad there's a list out there. I don't want to hire them either. Now there's a question out there as well. No, I saw someone the very much right, like Candace Owens instead was, you can't dox these people. It's cancel culture. And I'm like, guys, I've been trying to define cancel culture for people for a long time. Cancel culture doesn't mean, or being opposed to cancel culture doesn't mean you just do away with all of your standards, your standards of association. it is perfectly okay to say, I will not associate with you anymore. Now, you can't infringe on that person's rights. That's a very different thing. And there can be cancel culture can be unwieldy, and it can be kind of just, emotionally driven and not fact driven. It can be all of those things, and you can disagree with it. But in the end, like, you also have to maintain some space for actual freedom of association. What how do you think about that?
Yeah, no, this is a tricky one, because what's going on is that a lot of times you belong to an organization. The organization speaks for you without your consent, and you have to decide whether or not belonging to an organization, you're giving them permission to do that, and you're completely responsible for everything they say, or you actually err on the side of not assuming that every single member of a diverse association of people believes everything that the leadership might or might not irresponsibly say. And I think the latter is the better way to do it. There are a lot of people at Harvard belonging to the 31 or 35 or whatever it was student organizations that defended Hamas after this horrible attack. A lot of those students, they didn't believe that, and they didn't follow that at all. They just belonged to an organization of, where people that came from the same part of the world would hang out and have, dinner or something. And then these leaders are signing on to this letter, and then suddenly they're getting their names and pictures published as if they somehow should never get a job anyplace. And that's just too much. We actually need a standard of forgiveness. We need a standard of grace. That's one of the things that we actually need in our society today. And one of the biggest reasons that cancel culture is a terrible problem is because it's like a cult that has no grace. It's a cult. It's a religion without forgiveness. And it's like look, you and I are Christian guys. The one thing that we should be all about is forgiveness and grace. That's the one. You're never going to go wrong if you're like, yeah. You say that you didn't actually believe that. You belong to this group. You wanted to have nice dinners with people who came from the same town as you. Cool. I believe you. I'm not going to deny you a future because of that. On the other hand, if you're actually writing up an essay and signing your name to it saying that, terrorists are in the right, then, you're on record, man. You got to live with that.
Right. It's up to us to distinguish between those two cases, right? There's a big difference between mistakes and misspeaking and just, mealy mouth wordage. And, there's a big difference between that, that and like, no, this person actually believes things that are diametrically opposed to my values. I just don't want to associate with them. And I don't want to buy their products. I don't want to do, that. Like, and I've seen conservatives kind of get confused between those two things because they want to be for free speech. So it's a noble goal. I think their intentions are noble, but we have to think a little bit more nuanced about how we're even defining cancel culture. And it's like disassociating yourself from bad people who are objectively bad, right? There's a difference between you mistakenly being added to that list and you literally being on the list and promoting it. There's a difference.
Totally. And it's like that's just becomes retribution, and it becomes unkind, and all the things that we shouldn't be standing for. All the things that people on the right don't like about the left. Well, then don't do those things. I mean, that's a pretty easy standard to live up to, or at least to be thinking about as we do these things. But the problem is that we have this situational ethics in American politics today, where, if you didn't like what Bill Clinton did with his private life, but it's okay if Trump does it. This is a classic thing. Or, you had a no kids in cages sign in your window about the immigration policies of Trump, but you overlooked the fact that the policy was started during the Obama administration. Yep. And the reason is because the situational ethics are such that you like power for your team more than you care about the issue at hand. And that means you're wielding the issue at hand as a weapon. And that's not moral. That's not ordered and moral behavior. And that's a lot of the stuff that people are talking about with cancel culture, which is, the cancel culture is really bad, but when I can use it, I'm gonna. Well, no, if it's bad, it's bad.
Yeah. And unreasonable attacks that are based on falsehoods or half truths are just bad no matter what they are. And I mean, maybe that's the best way. That's the best way to define cancel culture, so that we're like exercising a proper definition, because that's different from disassociating yourself from people who suck, or at least in your or at least don't share your values. You got to have space for both options. It's like, okay,
and then give people the benefit of the doubt. Just give people the benefit of the doubt. That's the right thing to do. Somebody's like, I used to think that thing, it was crazy. I don't think that thing anymore. Awesome. That's great. Congratulations. Welcome back to society. If somebody says, I didn't know that group was saying that thing. Trust them. I mean, generally, we don't have to be naive and stupid about it. But the truth is that we could do it with a lot more grace in our society. And if we did that, we'd be a lot better off.
And it's actually at the heart of our founding, because our founders really tried to figure out how do you still govern with a kind of a somewhat of a majority rule proposition, but without infringing on the rights of a minority. Because, you know, right, we could have a 51% majority, confiscate the wealth of the 49%. You could call it democracy,
right?
And that's, you know, our founders were like, well, that would be pretty messed up. So how do we not do that? And so you have to come up with this idea of like individual rights and define what rights are and define what justice is. You know, so you can disagree with somebody's values, and let's use like the cake baker who won't bake cakes for a gay wedding. You know, it's one thing to say nobody should go to his store, right? Like that comment, I may disagree with it, but that fits within I think the principles of our founding. Like, I will disassociate from you, but trying to sue them into non-existence, that's infringing on their rights. That's an infringement, because they're not doing anything to harm you. And like that's not splitting hairs. These are really important distinctions, I think, you know, and just in creating a civilized society where different ideas can coexist together.
Yeah, which is what we're having a really hard time doing, and that you're seeing every single day, my friend. I mean, you're seeing that every single day, even in your own conference, the inability of different ideas to coexist for the general good. And the one thing it's worth pointing out that a lot of people who are, you know, watching your work, listening to your show, is that as people are, you know, doing this discussion of how many angels fit on the head of a pin in Republican politics and rules, a lot of business is not getting done. And the American people are not getting served. And that's really the stakes at hand. I mean, that's really what we should be all. And I know that that's why it's so frustrating to you. But that's the reason that your constituents should be supportive of you, is because you're fighting for them and fighting for all Americans to get the job done of Congress, as opposed to having the internecine arcane wars of Republicanness.
It's frustrating. A lot of the problems, a lot of the disagreement at the moment with the speaker's race, it's all been personal. McCarthy was deposed out of personal vindictiveness. There was not. I mean, just listen to everything they said. They can't point to a fact or like an action that's. I mean, they will, but I'm just telling you, it's dishonest, because it's just not how it worked out.
I know.
And it's kind of still happening now, you know, and as a backlash to that. And I got to remind people, it's like your vote. I mean, you get the power to cast it, but it does belong to the people, and the people aren't really. They don't really care about your personal grievances. You know, if you have a very good reason not to vote for somebody because of their policy stances, and, you know, the objective reasons, okay, you know, I can't argue with you. Well, we can argue, but at least it's a reason. But some of the stuff is personal. It's gotta go by the wayside, which is one of the reasons I hope we go ahead and move forward with a temporary McHenry speakership and get on with the business. I'll let you know how it goes.
Hope so too. Hope so.
You got to go.
Brother.
It's always great talking to you, Arthur.
Yeah, you
Thanks.
too. At your service. Thanks for your service in Washington, D.C., brother. I'm cheering for you up here from Boston.
Hey, I appreciate that. I'm still trying to come to do a speaking event there. We've been trying to schedule it at the Forum for a long time now, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure I'll be protested. It'll be fantastic. It'll actually be a lot of
you
fun.
won't get protested. You're not going to get well, you might get protested, but I'll be leading the cheering squad.
Yeah. I love it. I do my best under like a combative debate. I think it's so much fun. It's what politics is supposed to be. So
it is. You're by the way, with Dan Crenshaw, when nobody's got live weapons, it's not a real battle.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Arthur, thanks so much for being on. Thanks for your work.
Yeah, thanks a lot. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.